10 states that will collapse first. If the US enters a recession. Predictions for 2025. When a storm is coming, would you rather be warned or caught by surprise? As 2025 unfolds, signs of economic trouble are growing. If a national recession hits, not all states will suffer equally. Some are already standing on shaky ground, and they may be the first to fall. In this video, we'll reveal 10 US states most at risk of collapse, not just because of bad luck, but because of years of economic imbalance, broken systems, and hard choices left undone. From Hawaii to Mississippi, from New York to New Mexico, these stories are about more than just money. They're about people, priorities, and what happens when we ignore the warning signs. Let's take a clear-eyed, compassionate look at what lies ahead, so we can prepare, not panic. Number 1. Hawaii. Hawaii, often seen as a peaceful paradise and an escape from the stresses of modern life, is now teetering on the brink of economic uncertainty as we head toward 2025. Beneath its breathtaking beaches, aloha spirit, and deep cultural richness, lies a sobering economic truth that many overlook. The state's recovery from the twin disasters of the COVID-19 pandemic and the catastrophic Maui wildfires of 2023 has been slow and uneven. Despite well-meaning efforts to revitalize its lifeblood industry, tourism, visitor numbers remain significantly below pre-pandemic levels, leaving local businesses gasping for air. The over-reliance on tourism, which makes up nearly 20% of Hawaii's GDP, creates a fragile foundation. As soon as families across the country begin to tighten their wallets during an economic downturn, vacations are one of the first luxuries to go. And when they do, Hawaii feels the tremors across all sectors, from hotels and restaurants to transportation and small shops. Thousands of workers, many already juggling 2 or 3 jobs, are left even more vulnerable. What makes this situation more precarious is Hawaii's notoriously high cost of living, driven not only by sky-high housing prices, but also the inflated cost of essentials like groceries and utilities, products that must be shipped over long distances. Meanwhile, wages have stagnated, creating a dangerous gap between what people earn and what they need to survive. More and more residents are making the heartbreaking choice to leave their homeland in search of affordability elsewhere, draining the islands of the very people who carry its culture forward. It calls to mind the words of the Buddha: "Just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, even so the wise are not affected by praise or blame." But how can one stay steady when the very ground beneath feels like shifting sand? In the face of recession, a state like Hawaii, with limited economic diversity and such high dependency on a volatile industry, faces real risks. As the national economy wavers, Hawaii may find itself among the first to falter. This is more than an economic story. It is a human story about resilience, values, and the challenge of balancing dreams with realities. The allure of paradise can be powerful, but it must be grounded in sustainable practices and diversified growth. For those listening and learning, especially those living in or connected to Hawaii, now is the time to think mindfully about long-term stability, to support local enterprise, and to encourage investment in sectors beyond tourism. As the Dalai Lama once said, "Know the rules well, so you can break them effectively." Likewise, we must understand the roots of economic vulnerability deeply, so we can imagine and build something more enduring. In uncertain times, clarity and compassion, not panic, are what will help us navigate toward a better future. Number 2, Mississippi. Let's talk about Mississippi, not just as a name on the map, but as a place where real people are facing real struggles that many don't see until it's too late. As we look toward 2025 and the growing risk of a national recession, Mississippi quietly stands as one of the most vulnerable states in the country, and not because of a single flaw, but because of a combination of deep, long-standing issues that have been left unresolved for far too long. Did you know Mississippi currently holds the highest poverty rate in the United States at 18.8%? That's not just a statistic. It's nearly 1 in 5 people living with constant financial uncertainty, often just a missed paycheck away from crisis. And if things are already this hard during stable times, what happens when the economy takes a dive? That's the question we all need to be asking. Low median incomes, limited job security, and a cost of living that, while lower than national averages, still burdens many families. These are not problems that can be solved quickly. The cracks in the system are already showing. When a recession hits, they won't just widen, they'll shatter. It's not just about money either. Mississippi ranks near the bottom when it comes to education and healthcare, and that affects more than just test scores or hospital wait times. It shapes people's futures. How can someone rise out of poverty if they don't have access to quality education or basic medical care? These systemic barriers trap generations in cycles that are hard to break. And when an economy depends so heavily on a few vulnerable sectors like agriculture and manufacturing industries that often get hit hard during downturns, where does that leave the workers who depend on those jobs? Even federal aid, while helpful, becomes less reliable when the entire country is trying to stay afloat. It's no wonder then that Mississippi is losing people, especially young, working-age adults, who are leaving in search of better opportunities elsewhere. And with each person who leaves, the strain on the tax system grows, making it harder for the state to support those who remain. So, what does this all mean for Mississippi's future? If the US enters a serious recession, Mississippi is in real danger of economic collapse, not because of a single catastrophic event, but because of the slow build-up of neglect and inequality over decades. So here's the real question for you. What happens when we stop paying attention to the places that need help the most? In Buddhist thought, there's a saying, "A jug fills drop by drop." It reminds us that great change begins with small, consistent actions. For Mississippi, and for all of us, this is a moment to reflect, not just on what's broken, but on how we can begin to fix it. Maybe that starts with investing in education, supporting local industries, or simply choosing not to turn away from uncomfortable truths. Because in the end, a strong society is one that lifts up its most vulnerable, especially when times get tough. Number 3, New Mexico. Let's take a closer look at New Mexico, a place you might know for its breathtaking desert landscapes, rich Native American and Hispanic culture, and vibrant art scene. But behind all that beauty and history, the state is facing some serious challenges that many people don't see unless they're paying close attention. As we head into 2025, New Mexico is quietly becoming one of the most economically fragile states in the country. You might hear that investment income has recently surpassed income tax revenue for the first time in the state's history and think, well, that sounds like a good thing, right? But here's where it gets tricky. This shift actually points to an underlying problem. The state's growing reliance on investment returns instead of a strong, broad-based tax system is not a sign of healthy diversification. It's a red flag about sustainability. What happens if those investments underperform during a national or global downturn? And more importantly, why aren't there enough good-paying jobs in New Mexico to support income growth and taxes from wages? The truth is, New Mexico's economy still leans heavily on oil and gas. And while there's been some movement toward clean energy and tourism, these sectors haven't grown large or fast enough to stabilize the state. Oil and gas may bring in revenue during boom years, but it's a double-edged sword. When global oil prices drop, the impact ripples through New Mexico's entire budget. That means cuts to education, healthcare, infrastructure, services people depend on. And here's where things start to feel personal. Nearly 1 in 5 New Mexicans lives in poverty. That's not just a statistic. That's families choosing between rent and groceries, young people giving up on college because they can't afford it, and sick neighbors skipping care because the local clinic is understaffed. You might ask yourself, how does a state so full of potential still struggle to provide the basics? And maybe even more worrying, what happens when the people who can leave do? Between 2010 and 2020, over 30,000 people moved away, and the trend isn't slowing. When young professionals and families seek better futures elsewhere, it shrinks the tax base, hollows out communities, and makes it even harder for those who stay behind to build anything lasting. So if a recession hits in 2025, what's likely to happen to a state like New Mexico? One with a volatile revenue stream, underfunded public systems, high poverty, and a declining population. It's not hard to connect the dots. While recent investment gains might soften the blow temporarily, they won't fix the core issue. New Mexico needs more economic diversity and a stronger foundation to support its people. As someone who cares about fairness and progress, I can't help but feel we owe more attention to states like this, places often left out of the national spotlight until it's too late. So here's a question for you. What would it take to make a place like New Mexico truly resilient, not just lucky during good years? In Buddhist wisdom, there's a teaching: do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment. Perhaps that's the lesson here. We need to act now with clarity and compassion to build systems that uplift everyone, not just survive the next crisis. Still with us? That means you're someone who values being prepared. Drop us smart moves in the comments to show you're planning wisely for 2025. The next part of the video breaks down what this means for your state. Don't miss it. Number 4. Alaska. Alaska, often admired for its majestic mountains, pristine wilderness, and reputation as America's last frontier, is facing a quietly growing financial crisis that could quickly escalate if the US enters a recession in 2025. While its natural beauty is undeniable and its energy reserves immense, Alaska's economic foundation is far more fragile than it appears. The truth is, Alaska leans heavily on one single source of income, oil, and that dependence comes with serious risks. Over 80% of the state's general fund revenue comes from petroleum income, meaning when oil prices drop, Alaska's ability to pay for essential public services like education, infrastructure, and public safety takes a direct hit. And that's exactly the situation we're walking into. Oil prices are projected to average just over $74 a barrel in 2025 and could dip even lower in 2026, levels that are far below what the state needs to function comfortably. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. When budgets shrink, real people feel the consequences. Schools get fewer resources, road repairs are delayed, and emergency services are stretched thinner than ever. What makes things even more complicated is Alaska's unique tax structure. Unlike most states, it has no statewide sales tax and no income tax, which means there's no reliable fallback when oil revenues dry up. That leaves the state dangerously exposed during national downturns or global oil market fluctuations. And while some states can lean on a mix of industries to weather hard times, Alaska's economy remains stubbornly undiversified. Outside the energy sector, there are few employment opportunities, and that lack of variety makes it hard for residents to adapt when one industry suffers. Add to that the incredibly high cost of living, especially in rural areas where basic items like milk or gasoline can cost 2 to 3 times more than in the rest of the country, and you've got a situation where many families are struggling just to get by. It's no surprise then that over 10,000 people left Alaska between 2019 and 2021, a troubling trend that hasn't reversed and could accelerate as economic pressures mount. If the US economy contracts in 2025 and oil prices continue their downward slide, Alaska's financial structure, already stretched thin, could begin to collapse at a rapid pace. And while the snow-capped peaks and northern lights may still inspire awe, the economic reality on the ground is becoming harder and harder to ignore. So what can we learn from this? First, it's a reminder that beauty and abundance in one area can mask instability in another. For Alaskans and policymakers alike, now is the time to think long-term. How can the state diversify its economy, invest in resilience, and create safety nets that don't rely so heavily on one volatile commodity? As the Buddha once said, just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life. In this context, perhaps spiritual life also means connection, foresight, and the wisdom to prepare for the future, not just in nature, but in policy. For all of us watching, the lesson is clear. Sustainability must be rooted not just in the land, but in the systems we build to support those who live upon it. Number 5. Nevada. Let's talk about Nevada, not just the flashing lights of Las Vegas or the casinos and concerts that most people think of, but the real economic picture that's unfolding behind the scenes in 2025. What many don't realize is that this state, often seen as a symbol of entertainment and energy, is actually standing on very shaky ground. Just this past February, international tourism to Las Vegas dropped by nearly 20%, and domestic travel wasn't far behind with a 6.9% decline. At first glance, these might look like temporary dips, but what if they're signs of a deeper problem? You see, nearly 1/5 of Nevada's entire economy depends on tourism and hospitality, which means when people stop traveling, especially during financial uncertainty, this state gets hit hard. And that's exactly what happened in 2020, when Nevada's unemployment rate spiked to 30%, the highest in the nation during the COVID-19 pandemic. While it's easy to assume things have recovered since then, the truth is that many of the same weaknesses still exist today. What does this mean for the average person living in Nevada? It means a lot of people are still working service jobs with unstable hours and inconsistent pay, just trying to make ends meet. Meanwhile, housing prices in Las Vegas and Reno keep climbing, leaving families struggling to afford rent or buy a home, and in many cases pushing people into homelessness. Wages haven't kept pace with inflation, and to make matters worse, Nevada also ranks near the top when it comes to personal debt. That's a dangerous combination: rising costs, low wage growth, and a workforce living paycheck to paycheck. And when you add in the fact that the state doesn't have a very strong safety net to begin with, it's not hard to see how a recession could push things over the edge quickly. If tourism continues to decline and the national economy stumbles, Nevada could spiral faster than most states because its economy isn't built to absorb the shock. So let me ask you, should a state that depends so heavily on one industry rethink how it prepares for the future? What would it look like for Nevada to invest more in education, tech, healthcare, or green jobs that could offer stability outside the casino and convention world? As we reflect on all of this, one message becomes clear: resilience requires diversity, not just in nature, but in our economies and communities too. In the words of the Buddha, it is better to travel well than to arrive. That reminds us not to focus only on the destination, but how we get there. Number 6. West Virginia. West Virginia, often called the Mountain State, carries with it a powerful legacy: coal, hard work, and a deep connection to the land. But as we move through 2025, that legacy is colliding with some harsh realities that can no longer be ignored. For decades, coal powered not only the lights across America, but also the livelihoods of thousands of families here. And while recent federal efforts have tried to breathe life back into the coal industry, those attempts have come with painful sacrifices, including significant cutbacks to minor health protections like the federal black lung surveillance program. For the very workers who risk their lives underground, this rollback is more than policy. It's a signal that their well-being is no longer a priority. And with labor shortages on the rise and the younger generation reluctant to step into dangerous jobs with declining protections, coal is quickly losing its grip as West Virginia's economic backbone. On top of this, residents are now paying some of the highest electricity rates in the region, a cruel irony given the state's energy-rich history. The over-reliance on coal-fired power plants hasn't just stunted progress, it's actively burdening families who already face some of the lowest wages in the nation. In rural areas where opportunities are scarce and roads often unpaved, people are stuck between rising utility costs and a shrinking job market. Healthcare access is limited, infrastructure is aging, and hope can feel far away. Meanwhile, the population continues to decline quietly but steadily. Families, young professionals, and even retirees are packing up and leaving in search of a more sustainable future. This exodus doesn't just take people away, it strips the state of its tax base, weakening schools, emergency services, and the social safety nets that communities rely on. So let me ask you, how long can a state survive when its core industry is fading, its young people are leaving, and the cost of living keeps climbing? It brings to mind the words of the Buddha: nothing is permanent, everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming. West Virginia is indeed becoming something new. But what that becomes depends on whether its leaders and the nation are willing to invest in new industries, in healthcare, in education, and in the people who've carried this state through decades of economic and cultural shifts. If a national recession hits, West Virginia could be among the first to unravel, not because its people lack strength, but because its systems haven't evolved. The lesson here isn't just about one state. It's about the cost of holding too tightly to the past and the necessity of preparing for a different kind of future. So, as you think about the broader picture, ask yourself this: what kind of foundation are we building today? And who will it truly support when the hard times come? If you've watched up to this point, you're clearly serious about staying informed and prepared for what lies ahead. Comment below with "Recession ready" to show you're committed to making smart decisions in uncertain times. Don't miss what's coming next. We've got eye-opening insights that could help you stay ahead if a recession hits. Stay tuned until the end to see which states are most at risk and how it could impact you. Number 7. Louisiana. Louisiana, a state blessed with rich natural resources, a vibrant cultural identity, and a proud history of resilience, is now standing at the edge of a serious economic cliff in 2025, and many people don't even see it coming. While it's true that oil and gas have long been the lifeblood of the state's economy, the reality is shifting fast. Despite Chevron's Ballymore project kicking off production this April, the number of active drilling rigs in Louisiana has dropped nearly 35% compared to the previous year. That's not just a statistic, it's a red flag. When the backbone of your economy starts to weaken at that scale, it signals deeper problems that can't be solved by one successful project. And the thing is, oil isn't Louisiana's only struggle. Infrastructure across the state is in disrepair, from roads and bridges to water systems that simply can't withstand the toll of time and weather. Add to that the constant threat of hurricanes and flooding, and you've got a state trying to stand tall on ground that keeps washing away. These aren't distant possibilities. They're yearly realities for families who already live paycheck to paycheck in one of the poorest states in the nation. And when you think about the human side of this story, it gets even more urgent. Louisiana's public education system continues to underperform, and healthcare access remains a major issue, especially in rural areas. When a large portion of the population is already struggling, a national recession doesn't just hit, it crushes. Let's not forget tourism, which plays a huge role in cities like New Orleans and Baton Rouge. When consumer spending drops and travel slows, the music stops, literally and economically. That means fewer jobs, fewer tax dollars, and less funding for already stretched services. Meanwhile, budget deficits continue to grow, leaving state leaders with tough choices that often result in more cuts to programs people rely on. So here's the question. How long can a state survive when it's overly dependent on a volatile industry, plagued by natural disasters, and lacking investment in people and systems? In times like this, we can look to wisdom that stood the test of time. Like the Buddhist teaching, you yourself must strive. The Buddhas only point the way. Louisiana has all the raw elements to build something stronger, but it will take real effort, smart policy and investment in more than just oil wells and pipelines. It will require diversifying the economy, strengthening infrastructure, and making sure people, especially those most vulnerable, have a fighting chance in hard times. Because the truth is, a state is only as strong as its foundation, and right now, Louisiana's is cracking. The lesson here is that resilience isn't about what you have, it's about what you build before the storm hits. So, what steps should be taken now to protect the people and preserve the potential of a place that means so much to America's story? Number 8. New York. When people think of New York, they often picture strength. Wall Street, skyscrapers, Broadway lights, a city and state that seems to pulse with unstoppable energy. But here in 2025, behind all the hustle and glitter, the cracks in New York's economic foundation are quietly deepening. And if the US enters a recession, this symbol of American power could be one of the first to stagger. Sales tax revenue rose by 3.1% in the first half of the fiscal year, but let's be honest, that's a modest uptick that doesn't reflect the underlying vulnerabilities. At its core, New York's economy is tightly tied to finance and real estate, two sectors known for their highs and devastating lows. If Wall Street starts to slide or property values tumble, which becomes increasingly likely during a recession, It doesn't just affect high-level investors or corporate offices, it ripples through the entire state economy, threatening jobs, shrinking city and state budgets, and undercutting social services that millions depend on. And let's talk about cost of living. Whether you live in the heart of New York City or in its surrounding boroughs, rent, food, transportation, and energy bills are pushing more and more people to their financial limits. In fact, more residents are leaving the state than arriving, driven out by unaffordable housing, income inequality, and what many describe as a steady decline in quality of life. Can a place that so many dream of afford to keep losing its middle class? At the same time, upstate New York tells a different but equally troubling story. While the city buzzes with financial transactions and real estate speculation, many towns in the north are facing chronic economic stagnation, fewer jobs, shrinking populations, and underfunded schools. The divide between urban excess and rural decline has grown wider, and that imbalance makes the state more vulnerable when the national economy starts to falter. And we can't ignore the bigger picture. 2025 is a year of global uncertainty. International markets are shaky, foreign investments are slowing, and even the strongest economies are showing signs of fatigue. For a state like New York that depends so heavily on global money flows, luxury development, and a service-based workforce, the risks are high. What happens when Wall Street pulls back, when luxury apartments sit empty, or when financial institutions begin layoffs? The consequences won't stay confined to the city, they'll echo across the entire state. So here's a question for you. Is New York prepared to weather a storm that hits its very foundation? Or are we watching a giant that looks stable from afar but is already losing balance? This isn't about alarmism, it's about awareness. The lesson here is one of humility and preparation. No economy, no matter how big or iconic, is invincible. As the Buddha wisely said, even the greatest fortress can fall from within. For New York, that means recognizing the danger of overdependence, taking meaningful steps toward economic diversification, and investing in people, not just in markets. Whether you're living in Manhattan or in a small town near the Finger Lakes, now is the time to ask how your community, your industry, and your household would hold up if the economy turns. Because in today's interconnected world, resilience isn't just a word, it's a responsibility. Number 9, Illinois. Let's take a hard look at Illinois in 2025, a state that, despite its size, rich history, and major economic centers, is now walking a financial tightrope that's fraying fast. You may not think of Illinois as a state on the brink, but beneath the surface of everyday life is a fiscal crisis, decades in the making. The biggest weight dragging it down? A pension system that's wildly out of control. With unfunded pension liabilities soaring to $142 billion, Illinois holds the unwanted title of having the worst pension crisis in the nation. Instead of tightening spending or restructuring the system, Governor J.B. Pritzker's latest proposal for 2026 includes increasing pension benefits by another $13 billion, a move many see as politically driven but fiscally reckless. Now, I understand the need to protect retirees, but when your financial foundation is already cracked, can you afford to keep stacking weight on top of it? That's a question worth asking. And it's not just pensions draining the system. Illinois residents face some of the highest property taxes in the country, and that's pushing families and businesses to look elsewhere for stability. The exodus has been steady, with more people moving out than coming in, and that loss of population means a shrinking tax base, less revenue to fund schools, infrastructure, and basic services. Chicago, the state's economic engine and cultural heartbeat, isn't immune either. The city is facing a $1 billion budget deficit, and when the core of your economy is struggling, the ripple effects can be felt everywhere, from job cuts to public service delays to growing discontent among residents. And with the state's credit rating already teetering just above junk status, borrowing money becomes more expensive, creating a vicious cycle of debt. Now ask yourself this: what happens if a national recession hits at this exact moment? Businesses will close, jobs will vanish, and state programs already stretched thin could begin to collapse under the pressure. Illinois, in its current state, is not built to absorb another shock. It's already staggering. The Buddhist wisdom reminds us, you are the result of what you have thought, and perhaps Illinois is now living out the consequences of decades of short-term thinking and political avoidance. So, what's the lesson here for you, for me, and for any of us watching from the sidelines? It's this: no state, no matter how strong it once was, is immune to the effects of poor planning and ignored problems. Whether you're in Illinois or another state facing similar issues, now's the time to demand accountability, encourage innovation in public spending, and start prioritizing long-term stability over short-term fixes. Because when the next recession comes, and history tells us it always does, it won't wait for broken systems to catch up. It will simply expose them. Number 10. Arizona. Arizona, known for its scorching landscapes and bold political stances, has always marched to the beat of its own drum. But in 2025, the state has taken that reputation to an entirely new level, creating ripple effects that stretch far beyond policy headlines and into the daily lives of its residents. With the reintroduction of strict ID laws, this time backed by even tougher enforcement, businesses are now facing fines starting at $10,000 per undocumented employee, and the impact has been swift and devastating. Small and mid-sized businesses, many of which relied on immigrant labor, have shut down almost overnight following unannounced audits. But the economic toll is only one part of the story. What's even more unsettling is how these laws are reshaping the social climate. Local officers are now authorized to stop and question individuals based on what's being called reasonable suspicion, a phrase that sounds neutral on paper but in practice opens the door to racial profiling and arbitrary detentions. Immigration checkpoints are no longer just on highways near the border. They're now appearing in urban neighborhoods, near schools, grocery stores, even gas stations, turning everyday errands into moments of fear and anxiety. Residents across Arizona are reporting encounters where they're asked to show papers while doing nothing more than walking to work or picking up their kids. And it doesn't stop there. Hospitals are now required to report undocumented patients receiving any state-funded care, placing healthcare workers in an ethical crisis and pushing vulnerable families into the shadows. People are skipping doctor appointments, avoiding public services, and even pulling their children out of school. Not because they don't care about their health or their education, but because they're afraid. Afraid of being seen, afraid of being taken, afraid of being next. So, here's the deeper question. What happens to a society when fear becomes part of the daily routine? When neighbors begin to distrust one another and entire communities go silent to stay safe? As someone who believes in both strong policy and compassionate governance, it's hard not to feel that Arizona is pushing the boundaries of both. And from an economic standpoint, this kind of tension can be incredibly damaging. Business closures, shrinking labor pools, and public distrust don't build strong, stable local economies. The Buddhist teaching, hatred does not cease by hatred but only by love, this is the eternal rule, reminds us that fear-driven decisions may provide short-term control but rarely lead to long-term peace or prosperity. So, whether you live in Arizona or are just watching from afar, ask yourself this: how do we find the balance between order and compassion, between security and basic human dignity? Because when laws begin to target rather than protect, and when fear outweighs trust, a state's economic and social health can unravel faster than any of us expect. And that makes Arizona not just politically charged in 2025, but deeply at risk of collapse if a recession adds fuel to the fire. As we've seen, economic collapse doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds slowly, shaped by years of imbalance, neglect, and missed opportunities. These 10 states each reveal a deeper story, not just about policy and numbers, but about people, priorities, and the values we choose to uphold during uncertain times. In moments like these, it's worth remembering the words of the Buddha: "Chaos is inherent in all compounded things. Strive on with diligence." Our future, whether as individuals, communities, or nations, depends on how clearly we see the risks ahead and how compassionately we choose to respond. If this video gave you insight or sparked reflection, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the Journey of Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming videos that explore the deeper truths shaping our world. Together, let's continue this journey toward awareness, toward resilience, and toward wisdom.